All right. Now that we have distinguished between the slavery world, the colonial world, the smart world, then the supersonic world, based on you know based on the way these different worlds actually existed in terms of government, education, um, and speed, in terms of maybe being primitive, being analog, digital, and so on and so forth. Now, let us now come back to the main issues that are factors that are actually contributing to the divorce crisis today, that makes it a global change. And while you remember, I said, and we had to establish the difference between this world because we are going to be mentioning or employing these terms: slavery world, colonial world, smart world, for us to be able to actually analyze these factors one by one. So at this point I would like to recommend, because of the fact that we don't want to make this discussion very long and boring, so we have to be breaking it. So that is why we are making it, bit by bit, part by part. So I will recommend that if you are watching now, please follow us on our page. A Woman's World is Beyond Beautiful, and also on the other page, The Truth Beyond Reality, so as to keep yourself abreast with and subsequent discussions. So we are going to be looking at ignorance and education, foremost. Um, so we move on to the next stage. So please join us in, I think, part 7, where we'll be discussing ignorance and education, and we see how ignorance and education vary from people to people in these different worlds, and how it's actually contributing to divorce and global change today. Yeah. So for us to be able to, analyze these issues or factors that are responsible for the alarming rate of, the alarming rate, the alarming increase in divorce crisis, we have to be able to understand how the world have moved from the slavery world to the colonial world to the smart world to the supersonic world. And after the supersonic world, we have what we call the flash world. And we say that some intellectuals actually predict that in the flash world, that is where the world is going to be destroyed, because it will become, things would have become eventually so fast and uncontrollable to the extent that everything will move into destruction. So, but what is important for us now in this discussion is how we look at, is for us to look at how the world is going to progress from the smart world to the supersonic world, which is the next kind of world the world is progressing into. And we say that when the world moves from one stage to the next, or from one kind of world to the next, whether from the slavery world to the colonial world or so, there is usually a crisis that accompanies it. We call it the evolution crisis, which means that in actual sense, when the world moves from slavery world to the colonial world, the world is actually evolving, or the world is actually changing. So every change comes with its own crisis, as we know. So now, I will recommend, because for those who may just be seeing this clip for the first time, this is part 5. We have done part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. So for us to be able to understand most of these things I'll be talking about, I recommend that you can check on our page. A Woman's World is Beyond Beautiful, or Truth Beyond Reality. Either of these pages, you have these discussions, the videos of these discussions I am talking about. So now you discover that let's look at the systems of governments that were predominant in these different kinds of world. In the slave world, you'll agree with me that monarchy system of government was the predominant system of government. Then as the world moves through this colonial world and began to progress to the smart world, military system came to, to take over. And this system of government lasted for some decades. And eventually, in today's smart world, we are in the world, the world's governments are predominantly democratic. And there is something we need to take note of here. In the democratic system of government, we also call it, that is why you see in the West, they call themselves the free world because they practice democracy. Democracy is actually very liberal system, a system that advocates for human freedom, human rights, and so on and so forth. As against, well, in the days of slavery and in the days of the monarchy system of government, you'll agree with me that the humans were not as free, the world was not as liberal as it is today in the democratic system of government. Even in the military system, the world was much more controlled by its leaders than it is today. So freedom is one thing that actually human rights and so on are actually some of the things that differentiate this world better. Then, as we are now moving from the smart world to the supersonic world, the world is going to change its system of government too. That is why you discover that people have beginning to talk about the one world order or the one world government that is coming. This one world government is going to be well established in the supersonic world. When the supersonic world, when the humans have become well integrated with the supersonic world, the one world government will actually, come into place. It will be well established. Now, just like as I always say, every religion, every people, every culture has its own interpretation of the one world government, but that is not what we are here to discuss. What we are here to discuss is how the movement from the evolution from one kind of world to another type of world or kind of world actually affects human lives, from our marriages to even our religions to technology. Technology will also evolve as we move from this smart world to the supersonic world. That's why you're beginning to hear about supersonic missiles, supersonic gadgets. Yes. So later on, we look at the main difference between the supersonic world and the smart world, because that is also very important. Now, also, in terms of human activities as to production of food, let me put it that way, the slavery world was more agricultural. And eventually, in the colonial world, the world began to experience industrial revolution. And even today, in the smart world, there is still, that's why we talked about first industrial revolution, the second industrial revolution, the third, the fourth, and today we are talking about the fifth and the sixth industrial revolution, which we actually move the world from the smart world to the supersonic world. But there's something very important that we need to take note of. In this smart world today, we are not just talking about sheer industrial revolution, we're also talking about information revolution. This is why in the smart world today, we have the social media and the internet has become a very important part of our lives. Because for humans to be able to move from the smart world to the supersonic world, part of its characteristics is that humans must be transformed, become well informed and become transformed. And there is something I call the human arrogance that we eventually, spring up as the world is becoming more and more well integrated with the supersonic world. humans will become essentially very, very fast. Humans will become so much intelligent and begin to be able to compete with even artificial intelligence. So we will still discuss that as we move on. Then, in the slavery world, also, you'll also agree with me that the slavery world was more of primitive people. And by the time we moved into the colonial world, we began to have people who are, will I say, analog in nature. Things were slow, and things were more slow in the colonial world. And in today's smart world, we are talking about everything being digital, a very fast world. So which means that the colonial world was more faster than the slavery world, or the slavery world was more slow than the colonial world. And the smart world today is more faster than the colonial world and the slavery world. Then, when the supersonic world is going to be super faster than the smart world. So now, one of the characteristics of human evolution is actually speed. So, which is one of the things we are going to see, one of the difference between the supersonic world and the smart world. And as we move from the smart world to the supersonic world, things will become even more and more fast. So, now, in the slavery world also, one of the things that dominated that era was sheer ignorance. People were a lot ignorant. Then, as the world approached the colonial, moved into the colonial world, there was gradual awakening. People began to understand certain things, and in the smart world today, people have become more educated and more informed. And in the supersonic world, my God, we are going to have not just not just this is where the education or the information the world has been gathering from the slavery world to the colonial world up to the smart world is going to really bring about a very distinct and coherent transformation that humans are going to now be able to understand the effect of the internet, the social media, and the information that has been, revolving around the world. And the next generations of human beings are the types that I'll call the Aragons. The Aragons are going to be super fast people, like supersonic gadgets that we see today. The Aragons are going to be super intelligent people, people with super strength. Now, let me just give a little analysis of what I'm talking about. In part of my last presentation or my discussion, I talked about the supersonic entertainment, and I know that some persons may not be able to get exactly what I mean, what I am talking about. If you notice, what I call the supersonic entertainment are the type of whether movies or music or all kinds of entertainment that tends to project us into future world. People look at these movies, they think it is just science craze or it is just fiction, you know. But I bet you that very soon we are going to be having in this world people who are going to be such fast with super strength. Now, the education and information we are gathering today is certainly going to lead to transformation. When humans have come to the realization of the enormous talent, powers deposited in them, that will capacitate humans to be able to evolve into another level. So, so now we have to be able to understand these different words for us to be able to understand how these factors are actually, affecting our marriage. Let's take ignorance and education, for example. Just like we said that in the previous world, it was dominated by monarchy system of government, basically agricultural system of life. It was primitive, and there was sheer ignorance. Now, you see, that is why in here it means that the women and men who lived in this era were virtually or more ignorant persons. Now, you cannot compare this set of humans with those that lived in the colonial era. Now, it means that now you also remember we said that one of the things that differentiates between this world is the level of freedom that these worlds enjoyed. That in the slavery world, humans did not enjoy much freedom as it was in the colonial world. Though the colonial world was still a very restricted world, a world sort of much controlled, where citizens were much more controlled by their leaders than it is today in the democratic system. But there was still relatively more freedom in the colonial world than the slavery world. Now, then in terms of the smart world, we are enjoying, a lot of freedom than the people who lived in these previous worlds. Now, this goes to show that the marriages in the slavery world and the marriages in the colonial world and the marriages in the smart world are actually not the same. So if you as a man, you are living in the smart world today and you have a wife who has become educated, right? And that woman is no longer a slave woman, because permit me when I use this word, that is why we had to analyze this word, because I'm going to be deploying or employing this term, frequently. When I say slave women or slave men, colonial men or colonial women, I really don't mean that. I really don't mean that these people were slaves or they were colonialists or something. I'm just trying to designate these people by the era in which they lived. Now, for the slave women, right, the colonial women, you cannot compare these people with the smart women today. So this is why I always say in this generation, what we have are actually smart ladies, smart women. Now, in the next generation, we are going to be having not just smart women, super smart women that we call the Aragons or the Aragonian women. And also, the men in this next generation are going to be super smart men, or this, super smart men that we call the Aragons or the Aragonian men. Now, you definitely you'll agree with me that you cannot compare a smart woman with a colonial woman. You cannot marry a smart woman, because this is the mistake most of us make today. This is why we see that our marriages are actually having issues. You marry an educated woman, you still want that woman to behave like your mother who was born in the colonial era. What I'm trying to say here is that now, for the slave women, discover that their lifestyle is different. For a slave woman will be able to live under a man. Let me use that word, because that was the era they lived. It was a slave era where people were not free. People didn't have right to their self-determination. People didn't have right to their personal opinion. So also in the colonial era. So today, when you have a world where people have rights to self-determination, people have rights they have freedom, human rights, is well now being advocated than ever before, and you marry a woman in this era, and you feel that woman will be able to live the kind of life that our mothers lived, then you are making a mistake. That is the beginning of the crisis in your marriage, because you have not understood, or probably even when you understand it, you have not been able to agree with yourself that the world have actually changed from the slavery world to the colonial world to the smart world today, and eventually we are moving, on to the supersonic world.